Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am your host Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. You can follow the show at leftoftheprojector.com. This week on the show, we are talking about the hit film released just a month ago, Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler. It has, as of recording, hit $215 million in the domestic box office and closing in on $300 million worldwide. With me to discuss this great film, I have filmmaker and critic Brooke Obie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, of course. And I guess before we dive in, I had asked, even before Sinners had came out, I think we had, I asked you if you wanted to come on the show, and then Sinners came out, and you had seen it a bunch of times. But even before we get into that, do you want to tell people where they can find your work, what other work you have, anything that people can access?
Oh, sure. So I am a film critic. I am a filmmaker. You can find all of my work at brookeobie.com, but my newsletter is where I do my criticism as of the past year, and it is Black Girl Watching on Substack. So you can find all of my many pieces on Sinners, including my upcoming syllabus on what to watch, what to read, what to listen to, all of that, all the videos on the making of Sinners and all of that you can find in my syllabus on Black Girl Watching.
Awesome. Well, that actually leads me to sort of like before we maybe talk about the film itself, is sometimes I ask different kind of, icebreaker type questions. And because you mentioned the syllabus, and I'm thinking about, I saw a lot of people, you posting it, a number of other people after Sinners came out, is, if you like Sinners, you might also like X. And I think I saw my reading list, grew substantially in, books that I had seen and, media I had, movies I'd seen. So I'm curious if you can't narrow it down to one, you can share a couple.
So I do have one book that I actually wish that Ryan Coogler had read in the
Okay.
making of this movie. It's a book by Angela Davis. It's called Blues Legacies and Black Feminism, and it talks about the history of Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday, and how central they were to the blues legacy, and also how central Black feminism was to the creation of this music and surviving this time period. So I think it would have been, it's great for us to know now moving forward. And I think it would have been really awesome for Ryan to have included some of that information as well in this film.
Nice. Yeah, I assume that will be on your syllabus along with
For sure. Yes.
lots of other things. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
the one that I had read, and didn't read. I don't know. Maybe it's just things that are similar. But I read Ring Shout last year, or no, actually 2023. Now I was looking at my Goodreads. I read it 2 years ago almost, and I would say that is sort of like the closest book or media I read that has kind of a very similar vibe. So if you've read it, you might know what I'm talking about. I won't spoil it. Let people check that out on their own. But that would be my the one suggestion that I would have as far as film. And I saw the author talking a lot about both his book and just Sinners as well on Threads. So clearly, it was in a lot of people's minds. But yeah, the before we sort of talk through the plot and before I ask you sort of like why talk about this film, why have you written numerous pieces about it, which everyone should go check out. I'm going to maybe just very briefly sketch out the plot. I mean, again, of course, there's going to be spoilers to the film past this moment in the episode, but it primarily involves Elijah Smoke and Elias Stack, both played by Michael B. Jordan, in 1932 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and they both have their individual paths, as we'll kind of talk about in a little while, and they use money that they had stolen from some people while living in Chicago to purchase a sawmill to start their own juke joint for the local community. And it kind of follows about the first half of the movie kind of follows, or maybe more than the first half of the movie, follows sort of the entire day as they're planning to open it up and actually opening up for their opening night. And then, of course, things slowly unravel in the way they might in a movie like this. And I think it's hard to maybe describe the full plot, but what maybe drew you to this, and had you heard about the film before it had come out? Were you waiting for it to come out and then you went to go see it?
I was not that excited about it. If I'm going to be honest, I was
Oh,
not that excited about it when I heard about it, when I heard the premise. I just wasn't sure, honestly. I wasn't really sure. I think I had seen the trailer, and it looked interesting. I'm a vampire girly, so I love vampire lore. So I was like, okay, I will find out what this is all about. I wasn't the biggest fan of Wakanda Forever, so it wasn't like I was just like, or Creed 3, which I did like, but in retrospect, I'm like, in combination with Wakanda Forever, I was just like, I think there's a pattern that's developing here with Black women and the way they're being used in these movies. So I was honestly not that thrilled for it, but went into it not really knowing what to expect, and was completely blown away the first time that I watched it. I don't know how I felt about it. I don't know if it was positive or negative. I just know that I had a lot of feeling. And, for me, when I write reviews, especially if, there's something that I'm not quite sure about, I don't feel comfortable just watching it one time. So I had to go back and see it again. So I saw it twice before it actually came out for the public.
okay, got it.
And it was that second time that I was like, oh, this is the feelings that I'm having. They're complicated, but this is a gorgeous piece of cinema that is going to last for a really, really long time. Like, it was that second viewing that was like, that clarified a lot of stuff for me. And even some of the stuff that I kind of, wasn't all that comfortable with in my first viewing, my second viewing, it all kind of gelled. And I was just like, I understand why these things had to happen this way. I would prefer it to happen a different way, but I understand. And, I don't, it just, it felt like a gift. And then, so now I've seen it 7 times. So
Okay.
since then, for various reasons. I mean, some have been, I wanted to see it in 70 millimeters. So I went to Quentin Tarantino's movie theater here in LA and saw it, which was an amazing experience opening night. Ryan and cast actually came that
Oh wow.
night. They were so excited that we wanted to see it in the format that he created for us to watch it in. So that was exciting. Fourth time I went with a friend who hadn't seen it. The sixth time, I know it was because of the IMAX film strip. I wanted that strip.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and the seventh time, another friend hadn't seen it, and we just seen Thunderbolts, and I was underwhelmed. And he was like, "Well, we're at the movies. Let's go see Sinners." And so I saw it a seventh time, and it gets better. It literally is one of those things that just gets better with every single viewing. It's a real work of art.
Yeah, I would agree. I saw it the first time. I hadn't even seen the trailer and didn't. I just knew Coogler's like past work, and kind of like you said, I kind of had like mixed feelings. Like some of his earlier films I like more, some of the later ones less so. And I went in knowing almost nothing about it and just almost couldn't believe it. It was just like one of the most immersive and impressive experiences. And I saw it the first time in 70 millimeter IMAX. So I was like, it just couldn't. It was crazy. And then a friend of mine wanted to see it, and I thought, well, I'll go see it again. And we saw it again in IMAX, and he was also blown away. And as you said, like there were so many things I did not notice the first time, and that's the case with a lot of films, I guess. But this in particular had like layers upon layers each time I saw it, and so I don't know. Was there? You said because you said you saw it twice before, and then you saw it again. What would you say is like the most impressive? Sounds kind of like it's a hard thing that's to pin down. But what would you say, like, as a cinematic achievement, what do you think is the most impressive aspect of it?
Oh, cinematic achievement. I mean, it would have to be the music scene, the juke joint scene, because like I feel like on my third watch is when I cried at that scene. I felt like I had time to digest everything that was going on, to see the different instruments, and to see, all the different types of ancestry that were represented in that scene, and just it being a wonder, just that single shot moving through this space, and this camera is just snaking all around this space, and you know ha- having the actual physical manifestation of what we say, like the roof is on fire, like, or raise the roof, all that, like, and to see that on screen, like it really felt like Ryan was visually translating so much of not just our musical history or our even just Black American lingo that we have, that when we're talking about something that we're celebratory, it was also just like we're tracing here the history of the club scene, the space itself as a space where you can be free of enslavement, whichever form it takes, whether it's your I'm a millennial, so we were in the club with our business casual, in the early aughts, looking absolutely insane now in retrospect. But I'm just like that was what we were doing, and that was, I remember Thursday, Friday, Saturday in my 20s, like that was where like I went straight from work to that space and met up with my friends, and we just, to understand that he is trying to show that this is a through line, that it started not necessarily even as a reaction to white supremacist oppression in this country, that it's rooted in something beyond that experience, that it's all of this started where we started in West Africa, in Southern and Central Africa, and bringing those traditions over. It was just like, okay, now this thing is happening, we're experiencing this thing, and now we're using it to battle what we're currently facing. But it's like it feels like an ancient tradition to me. It felt like that's what he was showing us, an ancient tradition that is going to continue, that's lasted longer than their structures, and that will continue on beyond these white supremacist, oppressive structures, that we will always go as a people towards freedom. And it will be loud, and it will be joyous, and it will be musical, and it will be in community. And so, yeah, I would say translating all of that without dialogue, I think, was the best cinematic achievement of this film.
Yeah, I would agree that scene just, and I went in not knowing. The second time you go in, you know it's going to happen, and it's still mind blowing. I think is just, it doesn't lose its potency at all.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that kind of the through line you're talking about kind of maybe makes maybe a good point to kind of discuss is the time period which I mentioned. This happens in 1932 in Mississippi, and most of the people that are in this film work or live around a plantation as sharecroppers. And I think that the context of when it takes place, the location, kind of all of that components to it. You also get brought into the town nearby where they're all, where they end up meeting several other characters, which we'll kind of maybe talk through some of the characters. But what do you make of choosing this specific moment for, the context of the film, post World War I, and kind of this, I don't want to try to think of the term I'm thinking for, just kind of like well, I'll let you answer.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought.
Okay. So, it's in the center of the Jim Crow time period.
That's the word that I was thinking of.
Yeah. So that's where we are. I think that matters for a lot of reasons. I mean, blues music obviously, started during enslavement in America. So it's not like, the 1930s is a particular time of its origins necessarily, but I mean, we are at a growing, height at this point for blues music. This is also, so Reconstruction has failed, and we're living totally under Jim Crow at this time period. And so, having it set at this point, for one, you can just highlight a lot of things. I think slavery is over, but again, because of the evolution, which I think this movie also tracks, it tracks the evolution of slavery. So we have sharecropping, we have Black people still on plantations that were, I mean, pretty much, all through the mid-century, that was all still happening. And so I do think this was a great opportunity. You have, legends like Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, like they're very popular at this time period too, which was why I think it's such an oversight that, we have Pearline, which I love, and I think that's amazing. And Jamie Lawson does an incredible job with playing Pearline, and her song rivals, if not best, Sammy's song, Pale Pale Moon. But, I do think it's an oversight to me to not have a queer presence on screen, because this is the time period where Black queer blues musicians who helped in founding the genre and defining the genre and moving it forward were very active at this time period. So I also think, this is a very personal story for Ryan. So he's talking about his great uncle. This is the time when he's alive. And so what I thought was so beautiful listening to Ryan talk about his memories with his great uncle, and going to his house as a kid and listening to his great uncle play all these blues legends all the time, was that, he's trying to conjure, his great uncle was trying to conjure what was going on at that time period. Like, who are the people that he lost? Who are the friends, the cousins, the lovers, all the people that he left behind when he moved to Oakland. And so, I do think it's very specific to Ryan's family that he chose this time period as well. But again, it's ripe for so much discussion, and it's also not shown on screen a lot. So I think that kind of helps as well. We get the 1800s, we get the 1950s and 60s and beyond, but how many movies are focused on the 1930s?
Yeah, unless it's a movie about the Great Depression specifically,
right.
You don't get much.
I mean,
of that.
For Black people specifically.
Oh, yes, okay, yes. I was gonna say, I don't think I can think of any films that took place during that period of time,
right?
Let alone, like you said, any real. Yeah, I guess you said Great Depression, but that often leaves out that entire story from it, because it's usually not told from. It's usually told from the white perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think of like movies like the Grapes of Wrath. There's not really. Any of that perspective within it for the most part.
No.
And so that like you since you mentioned Pearline as one of the characters, I mean, I don't want to say we need to go through each individual one, although we could, but I think it's also important to note the context for Smoke and Stack, who fought in World War I and now had then moved afterwards to Chicago to essentially work kind of in the the gangster business, and maybe take both sides. And the context that you're kind of given is that they've stolen from both the Italians and the Irish, and have now taken that money back to Mississippi to essentially put it back into the community, if you will. I mean, maybe I don't know if you would say it that way, because it does seem like they very much want to give something back and have something for their own, albeit also like turning a profit. And I don't know how you square that. And also maybe also the theme that I was thinking about in that same vein is just kind of the idea of capitalism, and maybe, Black capitalism, and some of these things that come into play, and how you maybe perceive, their motivation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so again, I think all of these characters, what's so beautiful about them and what's so beautiful about that first hour of the film is we're seeing all of these characters, they all want freedom. And they all seem to find a different path that they think is going to get them to freedom. So for Smoke, he says very clearly to Annie that money is power, and that's what he thinks is freedom. And Stack is, all about, the flashy business in the community and all of that. And so I think together, both of them have this idea. And I think it's still a very popular idea, in the Black community today, that Black entrepreneurship is going to save us. It's going to offer us freedom, and we will be replicating the same systems, because again, you can't really make that much of a profit unless there's some exploitation involved. But if there is some way that you can give back to the community, then maybe it's all square. So I think that they did have good intentions. And,
sure.
I think, if you're operating under a capitalistic system, you think these are your only options. You don't want to be the beggar. You don't want to be the person who can't afford anything. You want to be the person that can give to charity when you feel like it. And what's the way to do that? By making as much money as you can. And if you can make a Black-owned business that services your community and provides a space of joy and freedom, even if it's just for a couple of hours, then hey, that sounds pretty great. So I do think that they had good intentions. But like Annie said, that money comes with blood, and there's consequences for that.
Absolutely, and I think that also reminds me. I think I briefly mentioned it because this takes place in Clarksdale, Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
as they're doing their planning, they kind of separate from each other, the two brothers, to kind of take on different errands, if you will. And Stack goes to the town to basically get all the ingredients and things he needs for his opening night, and he goes directly to a Chinese-owned business, a couple, Bo and Grace. And you also see like a very short glimpse or a small glimpse of kind of what the town looked like. And I think you mentioned, or maybe I mentioned to you before we recorded, is kind of one of the ones that I noticed and then I kind of dug into very slightly was the Jewish storefront that's located there as a Jewish person myself. And I was curious kind of how they fit in. But I think you mentioned that there were things that were left out of that scene. And now I'm curious what wasn't there.
So I think so. Also, the tamale shop is also there.
Yes, tamales, yes.
And I think all of that is wonderful. I think for me, what was left out wasn't necessarily on that strip. It was in the club scene, like because you are tracing, like I mentioned, the evolution of blues music, which queer Black people were foundational to. You're showing house music, which is also, an offspring of the blues. Where are the queer people? I wanted to see Black queer people voguing down. I wanted to see visible queer people in the space, whether it was in the past or whether it was, in the future. Like you had the twerkers, give me the Vogue girls, like let the dolls vogue down. Like I wanted to see that. So I think that's more so what I meant as far as,
Gotcha.
the people who were missing. But yeah, I mean, I think what it shows is that Ryan did a lot of research on what was going on in this time period. It's absolutely historically accurate that there were a lot of Chinese immigrants in the Mississippi Delta. They were brought there because of, the ending of slavery and needing cheap sources of labor. And because they wouldn't work in the fields and ended up opening these grocery stores, that's how sharecropping, became even more and more of a necessity to an economy that ran on exploiting Black labor. And so, yeah, it was very interesting, to have this community of people that had, this Chinese couple that was a part of both communities. They sold on both sides of the street, and they were able to do that on a foundation of anti-Blackness. You have them on owning two businesses. Smoke and Stack wanted to own one business, and it took
Right.
the Klan like 24 hours to try to destroy that. And if it wasn't going to be the Klan, if it wasn't the vampires and it wasn't the Klan, then it probably would have been, the gangsters from Chicago. Like this place was doomed from the beginning. But yeah, I thought, that was very interesting to show that you're trying to make a community of people, but when the foundation is anti-Blackness, it becomes dangerous for Black people to be in community with, other races of people who benefit from anti-Blackness.
And you could even, well, tell me if this is off base, but you could almost argue that later on, once, you mentioned the vampires, the I forgot to kind of maybe add that context. I mean, most people probably have seen the film if they're listening, most likely. But there were two members of the KKK that were essentially looked like they were going to be sent to kill them, and it just so happens that the person who's played by Jack O'Connell, Remick, an Irish vampire, is being chased and goes into their home and kills them or turns them, and then it leads to them going to their juke joint later on. What was I going to? Oh, but I think I was going to mention is that the Chinese couple, in a way, sort of turns on them later on. Would you? I mean, I've heard it. I've heard a couple different theories whether you would say that they sort of turned on the community or if it was simply just a fear. I can see your.
So here's my interpretation, and I will say that Ryan has come out to say that Grace should not be blamed. She was a part of the community. She was seen as family. And he included a Chinese couple, not just because he had done his research, but he had done his research because in his wife, Zinzi Kugler, who's also a producer of the film, in her lineage, they discovered, her Mississippi ancestors were Black and Chinese. So he was trying to create this idea of like, we're all family, obviously, because we procreated together. And the reality is, that's not always the case. And I think maybe he should have done some things a little bit differently if he didn't want, the blame put on Grace in the way that it was. But I do think I think the enemy in this film is adjacency to whiteness. So you have Mary, who it gets everybody killed essentially because she's, she's passing for white. She has 1/8 ancestry that's Black. And so because of the 1-drop rule at that time, she would have been considered Black if people knew. She was married to a rich white man. So she was living her life as a white woman. And she thought she could go and talk to these vampires and that everything would be okay because she's white and her whiteness would protect her. In the same way, you have Grace, who's working both sides of the street. So again, I think if you're in a space of privilege and power because you aren't Black or you aren't as Black as somebody else, or you're not treated like Black people, then there's going to be room for trouble. So I think the issue when Mary attacks Stack and turns him into a vampire, they all think that he's just dead, that Mary has, killed him. He's bled out in front of them. Everybody's really sad. And Grace is just like, we signed up for a party. She's telling her husband, like, wrap it up. Like, we have a daughter, we have a life. We didn't sign up to, help Smoke deal with the grief of his brother being killed. Like, that's not our place. We got other stuff to do. And I think if Bo had been there by himself, he would have stayed because he did have a close, relationship with Smoke. That was his actual friend. I don't know if Grace is really friends with these people, honestly. And so, he's obviously closer to his wife than he is to Smoke. So he's listening to her and saying, yeah, we should probably get out of here. There's danger afoot. And I don't know that necessarily makes Grace a bad person or anything, but it does mean, for the sake of this conversation, that she's not, that's not her people. Like, her people are at home. It's her daughter, so she's trying to get home to her daughter. And if they were all really family, then her daughter would be the same as her brother Smoke or her brother Stack that was just killed. We're all family, but she has, she's got her hierarchy, and that's fine. We all have our hierarchy. So the reality was she wasn't in that moment, thinking of Smoke and Stack as family that need help during a period of grief. And Bo, goes to his peril because he kind of agrees with her. So, and then when Grace, I think the biggest issue for me with Grace, and the lesson, I think, is that she asked to go outside. She asked to go outside like 3-4 times, and everybody stopped her. They're trying to save her life. They're telling her she's in danger. They're telling her Bo is probably safe. You don't need to worry about him. You need to stay inside where it's safe. And they should have just let her go. Honestly, I mean, if she's wild, she was showing signs of wilding out really early, and they should have just let her go. But they said, no, we need to, we're all community, we're all family, we're all going to stick together. And it was to their peril too. So I do think there is a lesson to be learned that, everybody can't come. If you can benefit from anti-Blackness and you're not actively, anti-racist, probably not safe. You're probably not safe. And both Grace and Mary got all the Black people killed. And I'm going to stand on that.
No, I think that's very reasonable. And speaking of, since you mentioned sort of like the family angle, the one of the other characters we didn't talk about is Sammy, the preacher boy, who's the cousin of Smoke and Stack, who is essentially brought there because he has a great talent at blues and playing guitar, and they want him to be one of the, like the acts, who wanted to kind of let him, be himself, and kind of almost like a coming out party for him in a way, as far as playing for the community. And then on the complete like opposite side, I know these are really related. But then on the other side, you have like Remick, this Irish vampire who is hears him play and now wants to take his music. He the co-opt his his music from him, and it's sort of like these complete opposite things. That is what the Remick wants to enter the mill and take their music, take their lives, have them become them, and kind of assimilate them into this white Irish vampire character. Whereas on the other side, you have Sammy, who is being protected for his they don't want him to not just become a vampire, but they don't want to give away his gift, I think. And I mean, you wrote a lot about this in your I think the second one. Can't remember.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Yeah. I mean, well, so Sammy actually is representative. Like, I definitely feel like he is, a metaphor for Ryan, talking about our history, our culture, our music, our everything is wrapped up into Sammy, like a representation of what it means to be a Black American survivor in this world. It's all wrapped up in all of these things. He's our youth, he is our future. And so when Delroy Lindo's Delta Slim puts his arm out in front of Sammy when Remick is coming for him, he's like, "You can't have him." And everybody's like, "Yeah, you got to go through all of us to get him." It is a representative, like, this is our culture. These are our people. This is our story. Like, you can't have it. There's not, like, we're not going to give this up. You're going to have to kill us. And so, yeah, I thought that was very beautiful, very moving. I feel like I would have been more moved, and I think it would have been even more powerful because Sammy is also the name of Ryan's great aunt, who is married to his great uncle that inspired the film. And also Ryan has two twin aunts, which is where he got the idea of twins and what that duality and what that could mean in this story. So I feel like there were some places where it would have been really cool to have a Black woman represent these things and have the whole culture be like, no, we're protecting her. She's the symbol of all of the things, in our culture. I think that would have been really cool, especially in this, if it had been a queer person as well. I think all of his points would have hit so much harder. If Sammy were a butch lesbian, all of the points, like the points about sinners being ostracized from the church and, having a father say, "You need to put this down or you're going," like, it just, everything would have hit so much harder for me if that had been the case. But yeah, I really did appreciate, all the symbolism. I think all of the characters are kind of archetypes for something. And yeah, I think that's a sign of a great writer, great thinker.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to the book you recommended, the Angela Davis book at the beginning. It sounds like there's lots of intersectional feminism that was maybe missed in this film, or
I think so,
or at least had a chance to add layers to it, as opposed to it being, well, I don't want to say it's completely male centric because there are strong female characters in it, but maybe not to the same extent had there been.
Yeah, no, this is I think the story is very clearly, it's a patriarchal story. It's a story about fathers, whether it's the father of evil vampire, the master vampire, it's the church father, it's the evil father that beat the siblings, the twins, this is it's a Black male patriarchal story, and women exist to help them out. And, it doesn't mean that they're not like strong people. I do think it is a sign of a man writing the story for sure, because I think that just often happens, to the point, like, there's a whole term for it, called fridging, when women are killed off so that the men can grow and all that. Like, I just think that there's a way that men can view women in real life that just pops up in stories, where if you're raised to believe, especially in like a Christian church, that women are created from the ribs of men, like every man that's ever been born has been born through a woman. But the idea is we came from them actually. They gave birth to us through their rib. And so they're actually the creators of life. And we are on the to their side, to help them out. They're helpmates. So yeah, Annie is going to put all of her energy, all of her hoodoo magic, all of her power into a mojo bag to protect Smoke. She's not going to wear one. She's not going to wear one. Why would she? No, no, no. She doesn't need protecting. Only Smoke is the special person that needs protecting. And even the magic is not going to work, on the baby. It's just a coincidence that the baby is also a girl. But anyway, there's neither here nor there.
Well, I was also just thinking. I don't think I mean, and that's a good point. I mean, I don't even think that the film passes the Bechdel test. I don't think there's.
No. No.
I don't think two women really even have any major conversations.
There's
at all.
one. No, they don't. There's one scene after Smoke turns away Remick and the other vampires, and Mary and Annie look at each other for an extended period of time. That's as close as we're getting to two women, having a conversation. It's completely, nonverbal. So yeah, it absolutely does not pass the Bechdel test. And then you have Pearline also, who, she dies because she's trying to protect Sammy, and then when she gets bitten and he's trying to attend to her, she's just like, no, no, go on. You must make it to sunrise, because he's all that matters. All that matters is, I take it this way, just because it fits into, if we didn't have so many other stories that were along the lines of sacrifice everybody so that the black man is the most important, and then I probably wouldn't feel this way. But because it just kind of fits into that kind of patriarchal canon, that's how it felt to me. It felt like, as long as Sammy makes it, then the community will live on. And, Pearline will get a shout out on the name of his club. And so it's just as good as her being alive to sing her own songs, because Sarah's gonna carry that on for her. And, so I don't know. Those are my only small,
That's okay.
small complaints.
Well, I saw also a theory. I'm curious. I don't remember if you weighed in. I saw a theory that Pearline was not actually married, and that was sort of like what she was telling people, and that I think the argument that I saw was, why would she have been out alone, on the town? But I don't know.
Her husband was old. I think it was very common for young girls to be married off to much older people. She obviously was not, in love with her husband. It seemed like the experience of pleasure sexually with Sammy was a new thing for her. So yeah, I don't think she was lying about. I mean, I saw that too, but I mean, I don't think just because she wasn't wearing a ring. I think Smoke and Annie are married. I don't think they were wearing rings.
No, they weren't. They weren't wearing rings.
So I just don't think that was a thing that people could afford, or was all that significant at that time period for this group of black people. But yeah, I think she was probably married. I mean, I think the point also too is like, they're sinners. So, and that's the other thing too. Like, it did just feel very straight. It felt very hetero, that like the biggest scandal was oral sex and adultery and blues music. These are the sins, but
that's another thing too, is that it's kind of, you're kind of see that. And so the opening scene is kind of like one of the last scenes. Kind of opens up with kind of like the end, and then it kind of takes you back to the day before. And the way that you're kind of meant to see it is that that Sammy has like committed these ultimate sins, and he's a sinful person. Yeah. And is it simply because, well, to your point before, you says that if it had been a woman or a queer character, that would have been such a more stronger point to being a sin. Whereas him playing music, to me, doesn't feel like enough of a sin. I don't know.
But it's not wrong. So I think, I think in 2025, it would have hit 1,000 times harder for me if those changes had been made. At that time period, I mean, it's literally called The Devil's Music. There is this
Right, true.
true story about, a man Robert Johnson, who was a blues singer, or he wanted to be. He was very bad at it. And then he all of a sudden comes back and he's able to like sing and play the guitar, and like an astronomical change had happened when people described as overnight that he had these abilities. And so there was this huge legend that he met the devil at the crossroads. The devil tuned his guitar and he sold his soul. And that's why he ended up dying, because the devil came to collect his due, and he died at 27, very tragically in weird circumstances. And that became a legend that is still known today. And blues music is called the devil's music. Like that was all real. But again, I think that's another one of those layers. I think Jedediah, the pastor father, had a deeper layer to why he wanted his son to stay away from music, because that guitar, as we learn at the end, is Elijah and Elias's dad's guitar, and he was known as an evil man. And so he's thinking, this is a path you're going to go down too. Most musicians wind up like Delta Slim, alcoholics, using alcohol to cope with everything that they're going through. And, so I think there were some layers there to that for Jedediah specifically, about why he didn't want his son there, and the relationship that he must have had with his brother as well, if he knew he was evil and accepted that. But I think the other thing is, in the church, pastors were upset because patrons would go to the juke joints on Saturday night. They'd spend all their money, and so they'd have no money on Sunday to put in. So it's capitalism. Like,
in the collection plate.
Yes, they didn't have money for the collection plate, and the pastors were upset, and they demonized this thing as, look what you're putting above God. This is demonic. This is devilish. And so it came attached to the entire genre of music and the entire experience of going to these juke joints. And so there was this element too there. And I think capitalism is a huge villain. I mean, it's the villain actually in this movie. I mean, white supremacist capitalism specifically is the villain in this movie, because literally everybody who takes the white man's gold in this movie gets turned into a vampire. Every single person. Like, that is the first entry point into that. And it's Smoke standing at the door of his juke joint, knowing that they are in need of money, knowing that all of the sharecroppers can't even support the business that they want to come and support, because they're paying with wooden nickels, because they're not getting paid real money on these plantations. They're getting paid in plantation money, so that they get stuck in the sharecropping world and can never get out of it. So even Smoke, knowing all this and knowing that they're underwater, that they're going to be out of money in 2 months, he still says no to this gold. And that's what ultimately saves him. And so everybody, I think, who, is against using this money in this way survives the night, at least.
It felt very significant to use gold too, rather than, it could have just been, American money. But it was very specifically that it was like this very weird thing. And you also mentioned like the idea of the devil's music, and then it's very clear that you have that through line to Remick as this Irish vampire who is an incarnation of the devil himself, or from in a similar way, and he's come to take the music from Sammy, or you mentioned Robert Johnson, and lots of Robert Johnson had some of his music stolen, by people like Bob Dylan, and there are other black musicians from the early 20th century who had their music ripped off by, for sure. Elvis was a big the number one maybe perpetrator of this, and so you have all of those things, and it's I think I hadn't considered the idea of like the devil and Robert Johnson, and sort of how he could almost, he wanted to take Sammy not just as like his body, but to take his music and then he
wanted to own it, because that's the other thing too. If and we see this at the end, we see the juxtaposition of Remick and Stack. Both of these people are missing their who are now gone on to be ancestors. Stack is missing his brother. He's missing that last day where he saw the sun. He's missing, all the which he also considers the best day of his life, as Sammy does. And Stack asked Sammy to play the guitar for him so that he could remember. And he does. He doesn't get to, there's no veil piercing because he's dead and he doesn't have access to his ancestors anymore now that he's dead and his soul is trapped here. But he remembers. He can remember that day. It's so beautiful. It's so vivid in his mind. That's when we get all those beautiful flashbacks of them making the juke joint that we never actually got to see. We get to see Smoke smiling with Annie, which we never got to see in the actual, occurrence of events as it was happening. And it's not the same, but it is something. And Remick could have just asked Sammy to play for him. He could have just asked him, but he didn't want to remember. He didn't want to connect. He wanted to own. He wanted to possess. And that was that is colonialism. It's like, you go to Hawaii and you see it and it's so beautiful and you're just like, man, this is just wonderful. This is amazing. What a great experience. No, I have to own it. I need to stick my flag here. And I also need to kill everybody that's here so that I can continue to own this. It's just a completely different worldview, which is ironic because, again, he is Irish. He did have this experience himself. The English came to him and did the exact same thing to him, forced their religion, forced their language, forced their way onto the Irish people, colonized them as well. And it just goes to show that being a victim of colonization, being a victim of oppression, does not prohibit you from becoming the thing that you were victimized for. So I think it was brilliant to make Remick to make him Irish and to give him that ancestry and be able to actually say it in the film. Yes, this also happened to me too. And it's not like, yeah, we're the same, we're trauma bonding here. No, that's, it's emotional mimicry for sure. He's using this to try to manipulate Sammy, but for the audience, it's like okay, I see what you're doing, Ryan. I see where we're going.
I think even on top of that kind of adds another layer is that the person who was hunting Remick, and then when he gets refuge by being led inside of the other family's house, is the Choctaw vampire. The Choctaw tribe, which are the indigenous community. So it's almost like you were saying this double layer, the Irish were colonized and then Remick is doing the exact same thing. And then the person who's actually trying to stop this cycle is actually the indigenous people of what's now America. So I really appreciated that added piece to it. And I saw a lot of people saying I wish there was a sequel. I wish there was this and that. The thing that I would love to know is the story of simply the Choctaw community more than anything, because that could be, you could have no one else in the film. It could just be this other story. I don't know. That's just.
I mean, I definitely think that Ryan should executive produce and let some Choctaw writers write that story for sure. I mean, I think that would be really great. I'd be happy to see that. But I also really like the fact that they pieced out when the sun went down and was like, well, we tried. See you tomorrow if you're still here.
Yeah, they in a way they're we know how this is going to go, and
right,
and they I don't know, do they notice that the couple inside are clan members, or is it clan?
Yes,
they see it through the
clan,
door, right?
Yeah, he can see it through the door, but also I think that they were able to find Remick in that house because of the 3 big vultures that are flying over the house, and they actually end up landing to let them know. And that's why the guy's like, hey, the sun's going down. There's 3 vultures inside. One way or the other, whether it's clan or vampires, we got to get out of here. And, yeah. So they tried to warn her. She did not want to listen. And so he said, and God be with you. And I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's where I saw the biggest connection. I mentioned at the top, the book Ring Shout, which is told at that period of time or a similar period of time, but with the KKK members they're not necessarily vampires; they're more of a monster, I guess you could say, than than a vampire. But I guess at the same time, like, what's the difference? They're still
Mm-hmm.
they are a type of, the fact that they turn several members of the KKK to become vampires to then prey on the same people is kind of
Mm-hmm.
also one of those perfect metaphors that just it it hits perfectly.
It is the white liberal metaphor. Honestly, it is. No, we want to fellowship and love. Like, it's like, do we want to burn crosses and murder everybody, or do we want to present this image of like a softer, gentler, colonization? Like, that's I thought that was really brilliant. Like, we really do see the two sides of oppression there, and that both of these things lead to death. You know, but one of them is gonna try and be nicer about it, or at least make you feel a little bit better about
It
going down their way.
but it's almost worse because you're like undead, or you're in this, like you mentioned, like the soul is not able to be
Mhm,
released. It's almost like a more horrible end. Like, at least
mhm,
in the other case, I don't want to say, like, at least you're dead, you can be, remembered. Your loved ones can visit you, or like we saw when Smoke goes to visit his
mhm,
the baby. Like, in this case, you're now trapped
mhm.
forever until you get staked, or I guess
Walk
you
out into the sun.
walk out into the sun. Yeah, which is
I I think Ryan is making that point. I do think that soul death you know is, and there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot of people who are walking around, the UN ambassador under Biden, who's raising her hand against genocide, against the ceasefire, soul dead. Kamala Harris, soul dead. Barack Obama, soul dead. Like, I feel like there's a lot of people in prominent positions who have accepted this idea of kindler, gentler, let me get ahead, Black capitalism as freedom and liberation, who will come to find or understand at some point, hopefully they will come to understand that this was a soul death. Like, there is a different way that they could have gone down, and that choosing to align with oppressive forces is not going to bring you liberation, and it's not going to bring you peace, and it shouldn't. And we see
yeah.
that, we see that with Stack and Mary at the end, that they don't have peace. They're still alive, but Stack says the best day of his life was the last day that he saw the sun. So
He's living, but he's not really like living. I don't
well,
know,
yeah.
like, quote in quotation marks or something. And this maybe is like slightly off, not exactly this, but one of the things that I thought was I think it was the first piece you wrote on your Substack, was kind of the idea of like the danger of the cookout
Oh
invite.
yeah.
And this kind of conversation kind of reminds me of it, because of the, this kind of this liberal kind of version, and these different, sort of, well, I'll let you let's describe that part, and kind of, maybe how that fits here too.
Well, I mean, I think we see, like, when Remick is outside and he's singing "Picked Old Robin Clean," like, it's very scary and creepy and not good. Even when they're singing the soft, ballad as Mary's being kind of drawn in, it's still a little bit creepy, like, their harmonies are nice, and it feels like there's something underneath here that's not great. But when Remick turns all the Black people that come outside the club, and they start singing, what is the song? Oh,
Oh,
why is my mind blanking? Uh,
it's
I
right
can
after.
literally sing it, but I cannot think of the name of it.
Is it the Rocky Road to
Yes,
Dublin?
on the Rocky Road to Dublin. When he is out there and he's singing the Merry Month of May, the Rocky Road to Dublin, they are jamming. I mean, like, there's a chorus, there is rhythm, it's like gospel choir behind him. They're ad libbing. There's this whole really, really just disturbing scene of him in the middle, and all of the Black people just like anointing him like we do in church, and it's just, oh, very, very disturbing. But that's literally what's happening. He's siphoning all of their, gifts and talents and everything, and the music becomes more lit. Like, there is something to, and There is a long history, and I think Ryan talks about this a lot too. He's a huge fan of Irish music. He knows all the Irish folk songs and all of that, that culture. And I think a lot of Black people do. A lot of Black people enjoy Riverdance. Like, there's a lot of commonality between, Irish people and Black people in America, like, and the stuff that we've experienced. And so, yeah, when we get together, it is a party. It is super lit. It's great, but again, if it requires, like, I think about Ludwig Göransson, who is the Swedish man, who is the white Swedish man that composed this film, composed all of Ryan's films. It kind of feels like that, it's all great and wonderful when you've got, the legendary Baba Maal teaching you and introducing you to all of these African sounds when you're working on the Wakanda, the Black Panther score, because I don't think he did Wakanda Forever, actually.
No,
but,
I don't think he did.
Yeah, No,
No,
I think he did. He did
No,
do
actually,
Wakanda
he did.
Forever. He didn't do Creed. He didn't do Creed 3, but he did the original Creed. So, and Ryan didn't direct Creed 3, so that's probably why he didn't do it. But when he's working on the Black Panther score, and he's got Baba Maal teaching him all this stuff, and he's going all around Africa, and he's learning from all these different musicians, and like, she's like sucking up their sounds, and who was on the Academy Award stage with him accepting the award for Best Score? It was him by himself. That award says Ludwig Göransson. It doesn't say Baba Maal. It doesn't say any of these other people. And I think, that's where the cookout starts to get, tricky. It gets tricky because, again, you invite everybody to a cookout, and then who gets, to write the book about cookouts? It's who gets to profit from that culture. There's even this book about the history of Black people making the blues called The Devil's Music that was written by a white man. I mean, it's just like it's everywhere. It really is everywhere. And so I think when you have an anti-Black society, when you have an anti-Black world, it is very difficult to have a cultural exchange. Like, you hear so many stories about indigenous people in this country, and elsewhere, who were inviting of the stranger, because that was our culture, to be inviting strangers in, to, be welcoming, to teach. You had the Moors over in Europe who went over there and taught people how to bathe and, have good hygiene practices. And like, what happens is oppression, murder, theft. You have all of these, great philosophers and mathematicians and all of these things, and people in history that we now know, we know their names. And they went over to Africa and stole their information and came back like it was brand new. So in a world that's built on capital, that was largely built that way by Europeans, it means that there's a scarcity mindset. It's just different. It's a different worldview. If you have a mindset of scarcity, then everything has to cost, and there will never be enough. And so you have to own this thing because it'll run out otherwise, and then you'll never have it again. And so it's just a completely different worldview. Like, you look at so many indigenous cultures, and it's so good giving, it's so community oriented. It's all like you sharing resources because we have an abundance. There's on this planet enough resources, literally right now, for in the city of Los Angeles, where we have a huge, disproportionate unhoused population. We have the most empty houses, the most empty apartment. I mean, entire condominiums that are sitting empty as people are living on the street and being criminalized for being homeless. It's a worldview issue that has created capitalism, and this idea that we can't all have everything, that somebody has to have the most, and it has to be me. It can't be if I don't want to be down there with everybody else, so I just have to take. And it's just, I don't know, it's very sad.
Well, and it seems like it very much, all of those themes, I think, are very well created and crafted into the narrative. And as we've talked about this whole time, I think what makes the film, I think, so rich and so worthy of watching it, multiple times and seeing all those things, is that there's lots of different layers to it, and it wasn't just a like, oh, I'm just gonna make this cool vampire movie. Like, no, it's far more than that. Like, there's very, as you've mentioned, like the research and his family history and all these things. It's not just like a movie that got slapped down, from like Disney, like some kind of Disney, slop or something like that. It has all of this richness to it.
And I think that honestly is what's so beautiful about this movie and what it shows, in that juke joint scene when you have the music that brings the ancestors back. This movie is a conjuring. Like, I feel like so drawn to, and I keep going back. Like, I felt compelled, and I really have not felt this way since probably Moonlight. Moonlight was the last time that I had to go to the movie. I saw Moonlight 10 times in the theater, 9 times in its original run, and 1 time in February this past year when they put it back in IMAX for 1 day. And so I like this. It's a conjuring, not just for us to go, you spend our money to go see this movie, but I think specifically for him, he's talked about, if the music that his great uncle was playing was conjuring his past, and he would play the music his great uncle loved to conjure his great uncle once his great uncle passed, then this movie too is an opportunity to bring him back to life so that he could say a proper goodbye. You have Buddy Guy, legendary blues singer, at the end playing Sammy in his 80s, and you have Stack, who just, reaches over and gives Sammy a hug. And Ryan has talked about breaking down in tears because he didn't understand. That was an improv moment from Michael B. Jordan to just give him a hug in that moment. And, Ryan was like, oh, I never got to say goodbye to my great uncle. And this is doing that. So to me, this is just like the best of what art can do. It can bring people back to you. It can, help them live on forever. And that's the blues. It brings people back to you. It helps them live on, and it helps you get through another day and chart a path forward. So it's very powerful.
And it reminds me, just, we didn't mention it, but just as I think as like another moment of both improv and like a very beautiful moment is when Delta Slim, played by Delroy Lindo, an incredible performance, they're in the car, and he has that little moment where he starts to tap the side of the car, and it wasn't originally in the script, and he sort of had to beg, him to keep it in, which they did. And it's such a beautiful moment. And like, that's a moment where that whole scene and the story that he tells of his friend getting, lynched, just trying to get out with some money. And it's all of those like little tiny stories are just, I think, what adds to that like richness too.
It's when you have a team that you trust, like with the actors that he selected to do this, and you have somebody that like Delroy Lindo, who's literally putting into like the smallest, 30 seconds, just showing you how blues is created. It came straight out of the cotton fields. It came straight out of Black trauma, and you put it into like that holler, that wail that he's having as he's remembering his friend being lynched and, and castrated in this horrific way for absolutely no reason other than anti-Black racism. And he's wailing about that, and he turns that into a song. You can't co-opt that. I mean, you can imitate it, you can, do your impression, but this is what this is what it comes from. So that's really brilliant too. And then I just saw today, the editor of the film was talking about how at the beginning of the film, this wasn't the original beginning, wasn't supposed to be a bunch of jump scares between, the pastor, Sammy's father doing his hand movements and Remick doing, a flashback, PTSD flashbacks. And then we get all these jump scares of this vampire and like, what's going on and all that. And so that came about because, the editor saw the similarities between the hand movements that the pastor is making and the hand movements that Remick was making. It's telling the same story, that both of these, white violent institutions are trying to co-opt Sammy and tell him what to do with his gift and own that gift. And so the editor's making this connection, is also adding to the horror because you're getting those jump scares really early, but also just being able to see that whole through line. When you have a team like that, like that's you really crazy. Can't lose. You really can't lose. So everybody's bringing their A game, and you just get a work of art.
Yeah, from top to bottom, the cast to the direction to the score to the cinematography, it's just it's really it's the first film I think I've seen multiple times in the theater, and I can't remember how long. And just because you're like, oh well, I want to see another film, or you're not going to go, whatever it is. So all of those things. So if you got to this point in the podcast and you hadn't seen it already, or you only seen it once, it's coming. You should go see it again, or a couple more times. Bring a friend. And actually, I'll tell the story. I might cut this out, but I was out on, was it yesterday or no, on Sunday, and I overheard a conversation of three sort of like 40-year-old white men trying to convince one of them to go see Sinners. And he's like, no, it's not a sci-fi movie. And then they're like asking like, well, what's a sci-fi movie? And he says, oh, it has to have like flying cars or aliens, and like, but it has vampires. And he's like, well, I don't think I want to see it. And he's listing off all the films that Coogler had directed. And he's like, well, maybe I'll go see it with you. And I don't know, for some reason I just found it sort of I don't know what it was about that happening, that I just thought like, go see it. Like what's the problem? And I don't know, maybe, I don't know.
I will say I was in a conversation against my will with an Israeli and then Australian white woman, a friend of mine at the time. And they were talking about, going to see Sinners, and, they knew I had seen it a bunch of times and I'd written about it, and we were all talking about it. And the Israeli woman is like, I just can't understand how you could just oppress people just based on their skin color. And I was just like, she's trolling me. She has to be trolling me. And she did. So eventually she did pull me into a conversation, which again, I'm at a private club out here in LA. All these white people are around. I'm not, even wanting to be in a conversation like this, but if you say something untrue around me, I just gotta speak up. So she's talking about how people say that Israel is an apartheid nation, and she just knows that's not true. And I was like, well, actually, and I've been there, and this is what I saw. And so of course she gets really upset. She knows that I had a Palestinian tour guide who was an Israeli citizen, but Palestinian ethnicity and nationality, and was able to take us back and forth across through the border walls there into the West Bank. I'm telling her everything that I saw. She's getting very, very, very upset. And she's saying like, well, you only heard one side of the story. You didn't even hear the other side. I'm like, I hear the other side of the story all the time, but please, when you go see Sinners, don't walk out of that movie saying you didn't get to hear the perspective of the Klan. Somebody's going to be mad. So just,
Yeah, well, that's a. I mean, I have to almost. I can't. Having that conversation just makes me like. I can feel like my blood pressure rising of having to be in that situation would be.
It was very unpleasant.
But I think about it too. Like this person who is like having their friends tell them to see it. Like in a way, I almost want to be like, maybe you shouldn't see it. Like I don't think you're actually going to probably enjoy it if your mindset going into it is probably steeped in like, oh, it's a black director, it's about black people, and it's a black movie, so I'm not going to see it. I think that's probably, and what's interesting is this is maybe the last thing to ask. This is sort of like the discourse around this movie and like some of the articles that were written, kind of trying to downplay the success of the film. And do you think that the success of the movie was like in spite of people not wanting to see it for like perhaps racial reasons, that this is like a quotes black movie, and so people didn't want to see it because of that, and yet it still succeeded beyond? I mean,
I think we have
sorry, go ahead.
I think we have statistically proven that black art travels. People want I was just in Cape Town, South Africa, and literally every Uber that I was in was playing black music from different genres, from different time period. I mean, like, we're all over the place, our music, our stories, specifically Black American stories. And that's, largely because of American imperialism, which is, its own, horrible thing. But a part of that comes with, people having access to a version of a public Black American culture that has been extremely successful. You know, the McKinley Corporation, their consulting firm, they did studies on this that was released last year that film studios leave $10 billion on the table every single year by not having Black American stories told on their slates. Like,
No.
that is just a factual thing. This is not some, DEI consulting firm. You know, this is the as white bread as you could possibly be, conservative, policy center that's coming out with this saying, hey, you're leaving a whole lot of money on the table. So it literally is. That's why, and a lot of leftist spaces, when there's this conversation about, it's class, it's not race. We're intersecting here because it specifically is. When you can leave $10 billion on the table because you would rather not make $10 billion than to have Black people telling their own stories, that is a very intentional thing. Yeah, you can look at what was written about Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, which had the same exact budget as Ryan Coogler's movie Sinners in 2024 had when they were going into production. And Ryan's movie did better. It did substantially better in its first weekend. It won number one. Whereas Quentin Tarantino's movie came in second place to like some animated movie that I can't even think of right now. But I mean, I'm just like the cultural impact, everything. It's been a chasm of difference. And it has not, they still wanted to downplay that success. And I think, it's absolutely, specifically anti-Black racism is the reason for that. Because they were very afraid of what his deal would mean, even though his deal is the exact same deal that Quentin Tarantino had for the exact same budget of a movie, where he would own the rights in a couple decades, where he would have final cut, where he would have first dollar gross. It's scary when a Black man does it, apparently. That's all it is.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to say. It's not. Quentin Tarantino can do it, but it can't be, someone who's not.
It's not going to destroy the system when Quentin Tarantino does it. Oh, he obviously has earned that. Ryan Coogler has he's got $2 billion in box office from.
I was going to say he's probably outgrossed by Tarantino by like
not
triple.
Even close.
Yeah,
it's not even close. So I definitely think too, with the fact that he shot this on both IMAX and on 65 millimeter film, he needs to be in the conversation of auteurs at this point.
100%.
Because he's got both. He's got the commercial success, he's got the artistic success, and it's scary. It's scary when Black people do stuff like this, but so that's all it is.
No, and I can't wait to see. I know that the rumors is that he said he wants to make a X-Files thing. I mean, I'm just excited to see what else he's gonna do. Whether it be also perhaps producing. I think you mentioned before, like producing other stories, other Black stories. So all of these things, I hope the success of this is not just isolated, and it actually leads to other films, other productions, other artists get to be recognized, other actors. So all of those things.
I hope it's all original. They're like, oh, he's got to do X-Men now because he was talking about how much X-Men influenced it. I don't want to see another Marvel movie. I'm going to be totally honest. I think perhaps if he had more liberty away from the MCU, Black Panther would have been a different story, and Wakanda Forever would have been different stories. I think because of the fact that it fits into this military industrial complex of movies coming out of Marvel and Disney, that he had to do some things that were pretty blatantly not cool, especially for a Black man from Oakland. Like, why is the CIA in Wakanda?
Yeah. It's
why
like,
is that happening?
I don't want to say like he had to pay his due, but in some ways I feel like he almost had to like prove himself, in this MCU universe. And I think now he's shown that I can make an original story from my own personal life history, and
it's his best one.
Yeah.
But I think that's a lesson for everybody too. Ryan locked in on his own personal ancestry. There's a lot of people who have made their entire careers cosplaying as other people from completely different cultures, and or telling stories about other people that's not them. And you can do that, and that's fine. There's something that unlocks when you get into your ancestry, when you get into your ancestral bag, when you dig back into your own history and bring something like there's just it's a different level of power and connection and community that you are tapping into, and it's just going to be 1,000 times better than anything anything else. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, but Brooke, really appreciate you coming on and talking about Sinners. I think I've been, looking forward to this, and thank you so much for coming on.
thanks for having me.
Of
Okay.
course, and people, and also I haven't read it yet because I'll link to your thing. But you had written a bunch about Andor too, which I haven't read yet, and I
I
need to read
haven't
that.
written, so I'm
Oh, you
doing my
haven't?
deep dive. Yeah, it's coming out tonight. So
Oh,
I
okay.
need to. I just wrote a little. You need to watch this show.
Oh,
I do
okay, got it.
a
Okay.
weekly wrap up
I
kind
was
of thing.
afraid.
Like,
I was afraid that it might have already mentioned the last three episodes. I probably won't get to watch them
no, that's what I'm
tonight.
saying. I'm not, no spoilers.
Okay.
Disney. I had to sign a
Oh
waiver
yeah.
from Disney. There's no spoilers here. So that piece will go live tomorrow
Got it. Okay.
ish.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna try hard to. Because it comes out at 9 p.m. Eastern when the last three episodes, and will be late to watch all three. But I don't know how I'm gonna start the first one and not watch all three. So
I mean, it's
that's
worth
my
it.
favorite show on TV. So I have
It's
to watch
worth
it.
it. You should get screeners. You have a podcast.
I get screeners for some films, but I didn't get them for this.
I had to ask.
Oh, maybe I should.
No,
That would have been nice.
I was notified in March, but I hadn't been keeping up with the show, so I just never was like, "Yes, give me the screeners." And then I got bullied into watching it over the weekend, and
Oh,
so I was like,
okay.
"Can you please give me the screeners?" And they did, and I just binged it all and Rogue One and everything this past weekend.
Yeah, I need to. I've already watched the first season a couple times. I did a few episodes on the first season, but yeah, we don't need to get into Andor. That's a whole nother. We can spend a whole nother hours on that. That's like the best show. But
It's
Brooke,
so good.
I know anyone should listen to or check out your Substack about Sinners and other films and other media, and your website. And Brooke, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, and you've been listening to Left of the Projector, and we will catch you next time.